YouTube, and yes, that little bit of fiddling at the beginning as ever to make it look authentic. Anyway, here in the UK, had another week of lockdown. I think it's now, God, I'm losing track, like week 8. I do lose a bit track of the days, it's like I'm getting better, I think, now this week. It's Tuesday, yep. I need to put a little bit of routine in my life, like on Sunday I don't do any work and I go for now a huge cycle ride for 20-30 miles around the hills, so that I kind of know, like on that back part of my brain, it's Sunday, and then then I'm kind of queued up to get some work done on Monday and all of that. The last 2 weeks have been tougher on the lockdown challenge for me because my own personal kind of lockdown, because my girlfriend went back to community, and so I'm here on my own, and it's been okay, but at times, I've been getting lonely and, reaching out to people and this kind of thing. It's kind of curious because like 20-25 years ago when I lived in the West End of London, before I started doing therapy and groups and all this kind of thing, I lived totally alone, and was quite happy with it. But at the time, of course, I was super armoured really, and not really capable of feeling very much what was going on in my life or what had gone on in my life. And now, like 25 years later, back living on my own after a long time in community and all sorts of things, it's challenging, but I like the challenge. It's challenging, but I like the challenge because I find challenges increasingly useful to me. And someone told me a few years ago, guys over 40, and I'm well over 40, need a good challenge, you have to keep accepting challenges or you will just stagnate and lose it. And so I thought, challenge, let's do it. Let's do it. Oh, I forgot to put it on silent, so I'm getting people messaging me. So, I've got my daily practice. I've also supplemented that with like 100 push-ups a day, which is not a marathon amount, but sometimes I get to about 9-10 o'clock when I'm usually going to bed and I just think, shit, I haven't even done one yet. And I have to pound them out. But it's good for me as well, I think I'm probably fitter now than I've been for like 20 years, despite being nearly 60. Quite a lot of cycling, quite a lot of bioenergetics, yoga and push-ups and walking around the place. So, that's pretty cool. And if I'm really honest, I kind of like object to the lockdown on various sort of moral, social, scientific grounds or whatever, and all of that kind of civil rights, personal freedom thing. But for me personally, it's been a good experience. It's been a good experience. It is like one of these limit situation groups, a bit like you see on the TV with that, what's it called? I don't remember the program now, but where everyone's kind of in an enclosed space for a amount of weeks, and just being in an enclosed space with myself, and it's like, okay, so that's the challenge. What do you do to keep your life in order and not get in a bad space, So thus far it's been pretty cool, and the way it looks in the UK is it's probably going to drag on for quite a while. So that's how it is, essentially. It looks like we're gonna be in some kind of ban for physical contact for the next year or something, until some great vaccine comes along or whatever. I'm pretty skeptical about the whole thing, to be honest. But I also, do respect everyone's right to have their own belief and right to have their own, social protocols around it and stuff like that. So that is how it is. Bioenergetics wise, the book is coming along pretty good. I'm just approving chapters now with the typesetter. We're getting the cover finally done, completed, and then it goes for publishing, basically. So hopefully in about a week's time it will be off to the printers. I use these printers in Poland, but they ship over pretty quick. And they're good guys. I've printed stuff with them before. So that is happening. Ideally I might have some hard copy by the end of May, otherwise early in June, I reckon. And likewise with the EPUB version, Kindle version, we'll get that out sometime in May for sure, basically. So that feels like, we're coming to the final bit of a sort of a achievement. I think it's taken me, I don't know when I really started again, maybe June, July. I had the idea about 6 months before, sat on it for a long time, rather lazily, and, now it's kind of coming together. Anyway, what else is going on? Therapy-wise, I'm kind of interested at the moment in eye exercises. I've been doing some for the Bioenergetics for Journey course, and Thursday, it's the, if you've been doing the weekly lockdown challenge, then it's time for a new exercise, and I'm going to do some eye exercises, and they're kind of fascinating, these eye exercises, because all they really involve is that you move your eyes, basically, in certain ways. You know, the rest of your body stays relatively static, but you move your eyes, and it's quite fascinating how much stuff they can kind of drag up, either on a psychological or energetic level, you know. So I'm going to bring a few eye exercises in to week 6, I think it's week 6 of Dev's lockdown challenge. And that'll be interesting for people, you know, it's good stuff. I mean, you often see people, you know, when I meet someone, one of the things is like, okay, do they make eye contact, you know, not that they have to be kind of super staring right in your eyes and shit, but like, are they basically afraid of, do their eyes look phobic, you know? And I kind of realise when I think about it, it's like eye contact is really, or not eye contact, but how someone's eyes are is really important marker to me for, you know, coming to terms with, not really coming to terms, but, you know, to what level do I naturally trust them? Do they seem open in the eyes? Do they seem guarded? You know, are they just pounding out a sort of script or something at you, and you can see that they're from their eyes, but they're kind of not, they're not really present, or they're hardened, you know? Eye exercises are also excellent if you have like any history of dissociation or depersonalization, as they sometimes call it. You know, just a tendency to leave your body, which in my experience, I mean, frankly, a very high number of people do. And that is one of those kind of survival strategies that comes online quite soon after conception, basically, even in the womb. You know, it's clear that a lot of people start to leave. Basically, they start to leave if they don't somewhere trust the womb environment on some energetic sensory level. And certainly in the first few years of life, it's one of the routine kind of strategies we have for trauma, you know, is to leave the body either into just a pure world of thinking. You can't really do that so much when you're very, very small, because your brain hasn't, those lobes haven't developed, but just into a kind of abstract, philosophical or spiritual even kind of world. People go out, and often you can see that in their eyes. You know, people who've got the classic leaving pattern, as Stephen Kessler calls it, or schizoid, unwanted child dreamer character type, you know, you can see in their eyes, but their eyes are kind of hardened and they might be quite bright, but they're kind of hardened, or not really dead, but a little bit stone-like in some ways, you know. And it's you know, so these eye exercises are fucking great. You know, this is not all about judging and bloody putting people who've got a certain trait down. You know, it's like these eye exercises are really interesting stuff, because I mean, you just sit there and you move your eyes in certain ways. So I'm going to be making a video about those on Thursday. And you know, eye movement is even used in some therapies these days as a way to bring up old stuff, and to get, you know, once your eye movement is really healthy, and it can just kind of, they can just kind of move around all over the place without any kind of psychological encumbrance in the way, then it creates a much higher level of psychological health and social health as well, you know, just as a person, as a being, you know. So I'm kind of getting into these eye exercises. I did a video on them and I thought, wow, these are really great, you know. So I've been doing them myself in the morning after my little yoga or bioenergetics workout. And yeah, I do highly recommend them. I think originally the eye exercises came out as a part of Reich's segmental armoring concept, which I never read so much about, but essentially he broke the body up like laterally or vertically into different segments, you know. Eyes here, throat here, chest, heart here, and this kind of thing. And then I think he had exercises. I have to check it out a little bit more. There's not a lot written down about it, I don't think. But exercises for different areas of the body to create more integration and essentially wholeness, you know, especially across the whole body. Because that is really the kind of holy grail of bioenergetics and of therapy in general, if you ask me, is to create an integrated human being, which in practical terms means you can really feel your body and all the intelligence that's in your body, as opposed to just the intelligence that's sitting in your thinking mind is online and available to you, you know. I was intrigued. I was listening to Candace Owens, who's a woman I got turned on to recently. She's a Black American woman who's preaching a lot of conservative values and kind of ripping apart the way she perceives the Democrat Party in America as treating black people, and welfare state and all this kind of thing. And she made a comment about the coronavirus as being like, people who can feel their gut, people who can, who've got that kind of gut level awareness, are sort of aware somewhere that there's something fishy about the whole narratives that are surrounding it, that they don't really trust it, And that got me thinking, well, I see, a lot of the people who are really fucking scared do have gut center, but something else is missing, they've got the fear response very strong, the fear response, and then that fear response kicks in and you think, I just need to hide away, I just need to separate myself, I just need to keep the bad thing out. And that is, of course, on a sort of boundary level mediated by the gut. And at the same time, I don't know, I don't fully understand the whole thing. I'm still kind of turning it over. But on the same time, I'm very aware that my gut instinct is that this is a lot of bullshit, and that's not to in any way denigrate the suffering that some people are going through, but I'm just interested in the kind of body chemistry aspects of it, because that is my field. And, I'm still turned on to bioenergetics deeply, really, to be honest. Kate. Let's see, I've got a couple of questions here or something, yeah. Doing the weekly workouts with thanks, cool. I'd like to know more about what we're working with. I understand it's releasing holding patterns. Is that specific to the areas we're working? What do we do? Which week are you on? I'm terrible when people, like in the journey, say to me, I've got this question about week 18, and I'm like, oh God, what the fuck happened there, I have to look it up. So if you give me a little bit more, working it around the shoulders, most people have a huge complex of holding from the throat, neck and shoulders, basically, and stretching down to the back of the heart center between the shoulder blades. But if you tell me which exercises we were doing, were they kind of the shoulders up and mouth open, something like that? Week 5. God, you see, my memory is not very good, so I don't actually remember which ones we were doing. But maybe it was shoulders and that. Yeah, that with the jaw stretch as well, that will open up this area quite a lot. The jaw stretch tends to open up like the back of the neck. I find those two really thick muscles that come up there, it starts to allow you to release. The secret with those exercises is to do them for kind of long enough so that you can actually relax in the full tension of it. And it sounds a bit of a kind of oxymoron or something like that, but what I notice is that if you maintain that stretch, like the shoulders right up, and you just stay like that for 2 or 3 minutes and breathe and feel your body, at some point you become really present with the tension inside, and that is the point at which things start to unlock and open, essentially. That's the point at which things start to unlock and open. Most of the time what we do with stress is avoid it, we avoid it. So we're avoiding, but at some point, if you're really meditative with these kind of quite deep stretches, then something starts to open and unlock, and it's kind of miraculous almost in a way. Sounds a bit of an overstatement, but it does feel like that, to suddenly become aware that, hey, this kind of tension or psychological issue that's been blocking me for a long time, if I just totally feel it on a sensory level, stuff starts to move. Often what I get when I'm kind of dealing with questions, and I always like to deal with questions on the fly because it kind of puts me in the moment, is when I investigate people, I'm feeling it in the moment, but what I find is they're interrogating things with their mind, and their mind is still trying to understand or, come up with narratives and things like this. And, there's nothing wrong with that, it's like, psychotherapy or something using the body, but the point is of the kind of work I'm doing is that you don't need to be thinking about it. That there's nothing really for your mind to do except to kind of keep your awareness in a certain place and allow it to open. And it's quite an incredible journey, really. At some point, this bioenergetics, it does get to be like a kind of advanced mindfulness, I find that you don't need to do, you just don't need your mind to heal. You just don't. In fact, mostly it's just like some, I don't know, some annoying kind of do-gooder that's always actually getting in the way, and like a really bad, annoying politician or something, always trying to make out that it's really helping and it's really doing this and now you should do that. But actually, if you just got it out of the way, then things would be a lot easier. Not in all of life, but in terms of creating some basic health. Because essentially the body has mechanisms to completely heal itself, but they can be hijacked by the frontal lobes. And animals, our closest kind of primate ancestors, don't have these advanced frontal lobes and prefrontal cortex, so they can't hijack the healing process very easily, so their body just does it. But the human animal has these advanced big lobes up here and this prefrontal cortex in here, kind of giving you like executive control over your personality. It's just fucking around with things all the time, it really is. And it's and it's not easy to get it out of the picture, because it will just keep trying to come in with thoughts and concepts and ideas. But over time, because mine is as bad as anybody's, if not worse, but over time what I found was slowly you start to acquire a certain space of meditation, presence maybe is a better word, that is underneath thinking. It's palpably underneath thinking. It's entirely untouched by thinking. It's not something you can model with your mind, but once it starts to happen, it's like, oh, whoa, that's what it is, In the body, it tends to be more centered in the belly, I find. People expect it to be centered in the heart, but I find it centered in the belly. But when I feel into my belly, I can quite easily go into a state of quite grounded presence. And I certainly don't live from there all the time by any means, but I still have access to it pretty much any time I want. And it's like a milestone. Once you've got that, then the control from the mind is broken, or at least it's like suddenly it's threatened. It's seriously threatened, because you see that there's a state of presence, of consciousness literally underneath the mind. So it's like, whoa. But I thought, up to then, the thoughts have been telling you that all there is thinking, and at some point it's like, whoa, this thinking is just the surface, there's a whole ocean of depth underneath all this thinking, and this is pretty cool. I've got a question here, I think. Why does bioenergetics accomplish release better than other body-based practices like yoga or qigong? Well, a couple of things. The question's a little bit loaded in the positive sense for bioenergetics. What I generally say to people is, try different techniques and see what is working for you. So, but something to remember about bioenergetics is that it's specifically created to facilitate release. And as far as I'm aware, neither yoga or qigong were. There's nothing wrong with yoga or qigong. Certainly with yoga, I do it quite a bit these days, and it's very good for me, But and qigong I used to do like 20 years ago, quite naturally. I used to really enjoy it, But it doesn't get into the muscle system where energy is bound up so specifically, So yoga, was created originally, I think, as a spiritual discipline, Patanjali and stuff like this 2,000 years ago or whatever. And, the asanas, the positions are a way to prepare your body for the kind of Hindu spiritual journey and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't remember Patanjali saying, and this is clear out your stuff with your mother or something like this. It wasn't like that. So he had his own vision of, what yoga was, and then various practitioners that came in his wake, or possibly before, I don't know the whole history of it, had their own vision of what it was, but it was not really so specifically about clearing out the past, though of course metaphorically sometimes these things are. And with qigong, it's working the energy in the body, and it's great. I used to do it before I even got into any therapy. I used to do it a bit, and it is good. But again, it is not specifically dealing with the charge that sits in the body from, the fight and flight response and the freeze response that's happened in pretty much everybody's childhood and ongoingly. We have this charge. The human being, when you look at it, is kind of dysfunctional in that the evolutionary development we've had with the frontal lobes are buggy. It's buggy, basically, So a lot of the natural healing processes that the body has are hijacked by the frontal lobes. And now what's happening in our culture, we're moving more towards AI, basically. If you look at Elon Musk and Neuralink and what he's up to and stuff like that. Quite like Elon Musk, but not that I know him well, know of him well. But, instead of kind of like saying, okay, how can we get the brain to actually access the healing power we have inside, it's more like, no, let's just plug into AI, whereas, because the human brain does have bugs, considerable bugs, and these things leave it very, very easy to manipulate, extremely easy to manipulate a lot of people, Some would say that this is going on right now in the current crisis. And also it means it hijacks things which are just good for it, And the blame, although we often tend to blame the outside, the government, the system, the food manufacturers or whatever, the real blame is actually, not blame is not the right word, but the real issue is in the brain itself. And if, more scientific research was given to this, I think it would be relatively easy to create a race of human beings which were super happy and effective, powerful and amazing, as opposed to, trying to join us up to AI like Elon Musk is doing, which might also be pretty cool. I don't know what it's going to look like. It's a bit freaky. But in a sense, it's kind of sad because we are just uncovering, the potential the human brain has to heal and move forwards, and it's a long, long journey, and it's not very easy journey to take, mostly because the human ego is configured for high levels of arrogance, essentially. It's just part fitted as standard. So if you ask any human culture, if you were able to go back in time over the last 2,000 or 3,000 years, if their culture was highly advanced, of course they say, yeah, of course it's highly advanced, we're probably about 95% of the way which human culture could get. And if you ask scientists today, they tell you probably most of them something similar. Whereas in actuality, we might be 1% of the way as far as we could get. And hopefully we don't all get turned into sort of AI hybrid robots before we get to really create some proper healing on a physical level, because it absolutely is possible. But to do so, does require a bit of a shift in people, essentially. Like what I see, I've got my YouTube channel and, there's probably 3,000-4,000 people subscribed to that. Maybe a few hundred of those are actively engaged a lot of the time, maybe 500. And of those, some of them will come and do the journey, and of those, some of them will come and step up and succeed. And it is a relatively small number of people in any given group who have somewhere got that kind of gumption to step up and move up, It's relatively rare. It's of the order of 1 in 1,000, maybe 1 in 10,000 who've got that. And so, we're rather reliant on these characters as a civilization or a race to move things forwards. And ideally, of course, you get a bit more of a system where the system that we're forging itself starts to promote well-being, health, intelligence, and human potential. And numerous people have tried to do that, from the 60s onwards, and the human potential movement, but it's never really got there. It's not got there yet. And I think it's safe to say we're still struggling, but you never know. But it is a shame, because I do see the immense potential inside people, and for sure 99.9 at least, or maybe 99.99% of the time, they will not really actualize it, and the overwhelming majority of those will not even try. And that part is mostly due to the culture that we're living in. Anyway, I don't want to go on some huge kind of a downer or something like that, but the bottom line is that if you start to practice and internalize certain rules about your own thinking and behavior, you are driven to step up. But what tends to happen is that we're given a lot of scapegoats. We're given a lot of scapegoats. Even psychology, supposedly a quite high art, is a lot of it can be interpreted as simply blaming your mum, your dad, society, teacher at school who used to give you a hard time or whatever. Excuses why I don't step up, reasons why I don't achieve, reasons why I don't succeed. But if you stop blaming anything outside of you, and at the same time don't go into just mindlessly blaming yourself, but start to take responsible action to move forwards, in my opinion, anyone can achieve a great deal. But you need that enclosure. You need that enclosure, and you do need to understand certain principles. And, people are up for it. I mean, I think we're living worldwide in more of a meritocracy now than we ever had. There's less prejudice compared to the past. But, there's still a long way to go to get to a kind of, in the same way that Osho, as a spiritual teacher I'm into, have this idea that if you could create 10,000 Buddhas, then they would create an energy field that was so powerful the whole world would just be pulled up by it, And in the same way, if you get a certain threshold number of people who really got not blaming, moving forwards, and internalizing certain principles, that would start to pull other people up. And you can feel it there in the culture, trying here and there, particularly in the States, You can see it, You can feel it, particularly, it's palpable at times, collections of people coming together to overcome their limitations. But the problem is always the unconscious mind and the trauma and the energetic charge that is being held in the muscles. It always comes back to the same thing in the way I see it. There's nothing else. And if you could get that charge out, then there's no longer a reason for most people to start falling back all the time. Bit by bit, they can move forwards. What is the final? I think let me just try this. Something retracted. What is the final goal of bioenergetics? I've attended 2 seminaries of it here in Rio de Janeiro, but I still can't picture the end goal. Well, end goal is to have a good life. Basically, And I don't know what the end goal of bioenergetics is. On a practical level, on a physical level, it's to try and get as much of the kind of charge out of your muscle system. And the reality is your mind will keep pumping it in, you keep taking it out. But at some point, there's a fluidity there and your energy can more naturally move. I would say on a practical level, that's probably the end goal. With your mind, you see, it's not really working the way I teach it so directly on the mind. It's just that the mind is essentially, your ego is sitting on a big rubbish heap and it doesn't really know there's a big rubbish heap there, and it's creating belief systems to not get into the rubbish heap. But basically, the bioenergetics starts to take the rubbish heap out, and once you take the blocks out of your own being, little by little, slowly, then what's left is the real you. And for most people, it's a slow journey, and in a sense it needs to be, because human beings are very, very deep, very, very deep. And for your ego to integrate that depth takes a while. It takes a while. For a long time, because of my work, I was working with, partly because I'm working with the body and with energy and bioenergetics, and partly because I was working for a long time in the kind of new age spiritual field. I would get a lot of people who'd had Kundalini experiences, or these kind of things where a big charge or explosion goes off in their body at some point, and their body's shaking and stuff, and all sorts of weird spiritual visions happen. And, it's not a phenomena that's widely recognised in Western medicine, a little bit, I think. But then they find me on the internet and come to talk to me or come to my groups and this kind of thing. And what I saw, some of them would end up in psychotic state, basically, So there's this immense, I've forgotten a little bit of the strand of what I was saying, but there's this immense potential inside people. We have an incredible depth. Once you start to clean out the ego and start to understand this kind of ocean of consciousness underneath, and experience and access that, we have immense depth. But it takes a while to integrate that into your life. It just inevitably does. And if a change happens too quickly, like these people who've had Kundalini experiences, for some of them, it happens so quickly that they're thrown into a kind of crazy state. They're acting mad out on the street. They're diagnosed as psychotic, or having a psychotic episode or something like this, sometimes bipolar. And they're put on meds, and then they're in the kind of the mental health care system basically. And ideally, what you want is for spiritual experiences and for taking out the blocks and the depth to occur slowly over a period of time, so people can integrate that. They can integrate that at an ego level to come face to face with the kind of, the core presence of the universe, and the absence of of personal selfhood in a way, is scary at an ego level. It will shake it and bash it around, and I do frequently meet people because they come to my groups quite a lot, though right now I can't run any, of course, with the lockdown, who've had these kinds of experiences, and you can see, and I have to learn certain ways of communicating to bring them back a little bit, because we still need to work and integrate on the whole human layer for a long time, Anyway, let me check a few of these questions. This is about being an adult. A lot is about being an adult, yes, exactly, growing up and putting away the childish things and stuff. Hey Steve, hope all is well. Newcastle is doing well along the coast. Cool, that's nice. It's pretty good down here in Brighton, or Hove I should say. It's challenging for the last couple of weeks just being on my own, but I've also got quite a lot of friends around, and it's a good challenge, it's a good challenge. Yes, I've had Kundalini energies rising up at times, nothing frightening mind. Yeah, well that's good, basically. That's good. It's like we need to go through this integration. I also had a Kundalini experience when I was like about 33, living just in Thailand for a few months, basically as a complete waster and druggie in those days. And I had this very powerful experience one night, and it kind of went away after a few days, and then I just went back to normal. And then about 5 years later, I started getting interested in meditation out of nowhere, and so at some point realised, I heard about Kundalini experiences like years later, and then I suddenly thought, oh wow, that must have been what happened to me. It's kind of curious, but these things happen to people sometimes also who are very repressed as well. There's a sudden surge of energy through the system, a bit like plumbing when you take a block out or something, and it's just a bit overwhelming. It's better if it comes up a bit more slow or something like this. I remember you telling me that energy would just make sense down the line, and I guess for me it's all making sense now. Oh, that's cool, man. That's cool. It is one of those practices that it works on what's going on underneath, it works on the back room. It works on the back room in a sense, Are there other modern books and resources besides Stephen Kessler's that you would recommend? Well, that's a good question. I should look on my little bookshelf or try and think what interesting stuff have I read. Someone was telling me not long ago about some Reich home book and how great that was, but I don't know if I've got a copy of it. I didn't look later on. But let me just have a little look here. Yeah, I mean, there's not, the reality is with the bioenergetics, it's like, you've got a lot of books by Alexander Lowen. I think he wrote about 15 books. I maybe read 5 of them. But only one really has a lot of exercises in it, and so it's a bit lacking in that field. And yes, it's like you can learn lots of stuff about it and you can read lots of books, but there is a sense in which reading the books is kind of like walking around a swimming pool, reading about what it's like to swim, and inevitably at some point you really have to jump in And the books can provide some useful kind of, incentive to jump in, and some useful kind of information to kind of keep you in the water in a certain way, or to help you deal with issues that come up. But at some point you do need to leap in and really just get involved in therapy somewhere, or whatever's going on, to clear stuff out. Basically, which is one way of saying I don't know any other good books off the top of my head that I've read recently that I would really recommend as being really, really great. I regularly get people coming to me who are quite intellectual. I've been quite intellectual in my time as well, and then they're very busy with their mind and books and ideas and theories, and I think that's all great, because maybe that's how they get into the actual practice. But make no mistake, at some point you have to put the books down and jump into the water and see if you swim or not, basically. Do you think bioenergetics would help with pure OCD, which is intrusive, disturbing thoughts? It is something I've been suffering from for some time. I mean, any issues like this, like OCD, essentially on a body energetic level, can be treated by increasing the level of grounding in the person. And in bioenergetic terms, that means reconnecting, opening the belly center on an energetic level and connecting it to the soles of the feet, where we make contact with the earth. So opening the feet, ankles, legs, hips, pelvis and belly, and getting that connection going is very useful for anyone with any condition where they get taken over by certain thought streams and stuff like this, which I would say OCD usually is. It's a kind of thinking pattern that of course then manifests into a behavioural pattern, because the thoughts have so much power. So, if you've got a clinical condition, it's a little hard for me just to advise things, but you can rest assured that if you can get more grounding going in your body, then progressively it will change. The same could be said for, a lot of kind of mental disorders, essentially, which are originating from thought patterns or behaviour which is ungrounded. Slowly over time, if you can get more grounding going, more connection to the earth, then you can recognise when a thought stream is happening and trying to take you over, and it's not going to lead in a good direction, and you can breathe and feel your body, and you can come back into your body, and it doesn't have control over your behaviour anymore. And this is of course what you're looking for with these things. But it can be quite a long job. It's not like taking a medicine or something like that. You may have to work at it quite hard. You may need clinical support along the way, depending on your condition. But I would say, personally, over time, it's more likely to be effective than, say, psychotherapy. Thank you for the question. That may have been me. It was A Writing Therapy by Jack Willis. I must remember that, hey? The third edition was published in 2008 before the author passed away. Okay, I should make a note of that, because someone was asking me that on the journey thing. Let me just... Oops. I think I may even have got a copy of the thing actually, but someone was asking me about it, and I thought, oh God, what did that person say? Do I really want to listen to 3 of my live streams to try and find a comment again? Let's have a little look. Cool. Thank you for that, Jack. Cheers. Daniel Zedan. In your opinion, is the Christian idea of God compatible with bioenergetic practice? Well, yes, basically, in the sense that bioenergetic practice is not really very theological, certainly not the way I teach it. It's more like a bodywork routine that you use to take blocks out of your own being, So, if you were studying, if you're on the 52-week journey, for example, it's not like I'm giving you some kind of spiritual concepts for your mind, You know, whether you are a Buddhist or a Christian or a Muslim or Hindu or whatever, it's not really going to make any difference. It's mostly whether you want to work with your body to clear stuff out of your unconscious, basically. So, you know, it's not incompatible with any religious belief, essentially. You know, as long as the religious belief doesn't say that, you know, you're not allowed to put your body in a certain position and move and make a bit of sound or something like that, you know, then essentially it's fine, because it doesn't really have a kind of, with bioenergetics, it's very, very practical, basically. It doesn't really have a kind of theological or philosophic side to it. Not that, I mean, certainly in its origin in the West, it had more, you know, with Alexander Lowen, who wrote a lot of books and stuff, but certainly the way I teach it, it's super practical, and I have personally no problem with people from religious background coming, you know, it's fine. Would love to see a modern book on bio, something a bit more up to date. Well, my one should be here soon. It is actually at the typesetters right now. This guy I got on one of these websites, you know, where you hire freelancers, and he's out in the Philippines and he's typesetting it, and we've been looking at the, you know, how to just structure the chapter and blah blah. Not in terms of writing, it's all done and all the pictures are done, but just in terms of how it's going to look when it's a book. So hopefully that's done in about a week, and then I can shoot it off to the printers, essentially. You know, but again, my book has a bit of theory in it, but basically it's mostly practical exercises, because, you know, I've been concerned that what with the level of kind of cultural upheaval going on, and the way that a lot of body practices have kind of disappeared into the distance somewhere, you know, that we might come up a generation later and there's no record of half of this stuff, you know. So the great thing about human culture so far is that it's a bit like kind of, you know, the library at Alexandria. You know, we've got immense resources online and Amazon and whatever, so that if something's been published or printed or made into an EPUB, you still can get it, you know. So I think that's one of the real saving graces, and hopefully we don't have a great book burning at any time and try and do some sort of Cambodian year zero kind of thing. But continue. Okay, let's have a look at a few questions. Thanks, guys. What are your thoughts on semen retention? Well, you know, it's a tantric practice as I see it, and I don't really have like a philosophy around it. I often get, because of my YouTube channel, a lot of young guys like in their late teens, early 20s, you know, asking about this kind of thing, and it's like, I think it's okay to ejaculate, you know, but if you're doing it all the time, it can drain you of energy. If you never do it and you're horny as fuck, it can drive you a bit crazy, you know. So I'm a bit of a middle way on this kind of thing, a bit of a middle way kind of person. You know, some people are like, you know, do this challenge to not touch your genitals for a year or 21 days or whatever. It's a bit, you know, it's horses for courses. I don't think there's one philosophy that really works for everyone. So I don't have a huge position on it, but it's a question I often get asked. And also, you know, I made a little video a few months ago about Reiki and the Reichian approach to energy and sexual energy, and the kind of tantric approach. You can look that up. It's somewhere a couple of months ago on my channel, if you're interested. Thanks for your question. What are some ideas that you would propose for a scientific study of bioenergetics? Well, you know, the thing that's kind of lacking, and I have to hold my hands up and say, I don't super study the physiology, modern scientific research, and follow it, what there is. But the thing that's lacking is that the exciting stuff that happened was in the 90s with Stephen Porges, I think it was the 90s anyway, and polyvagal theory, and Peter E. Levine, and his Waking the Tiger book, and his ideas of, you know, the two theories kind of feed into each other. But the most exciting thing is to find a way to connect, you know, the fact that bioenergetic practice does release holding in the past and charge, and actually find in the muscle system, okay, where is this charge? Like, for example, I mean, what's interesting is when you can compare the kind of neurological and the psychological approaches to modern psychology. The psychological is very conceptual, you know, you've got the unconscious, And this formulation of the unconscious by Freud in the kind of 1890s, and he wasn't the first one to formulate it, but he kind of made it popular, or people really got into his idea. That was the branch that caused modern psychology to emerge from neurology of the sort of 1860s, 1870s, Charcot and stuff like that. So he started to make a model that wasn't based on what the brain or the body was doing, but that was functionally correct. And that's what Freud did, basically, and an assortment of people before him. Freud made it famous, like I say. And the problem is we've never really been able to come back to the body. And so when you look at bioenergetics from a kind of classical psychological perspective, it's working on the unconscious. Now, when you look at it from a modern kind of neurological perspective, it's clearly doing something, but they don't really go for an unconscious mind so much as I understand modern neurology. It's more like, there are certain circuits which are either functioning or not functioning well, and essentially, and so, the thing that would be so great, is someone to start to really tie. I mean, polyvagal theory was a good attempt really to tie, where Stephen Porges proposed that apart from the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, which are to do with, the sympathetic to do with arousal, getting ready to fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, which is to do with relaxation, that there's this polyvagal circuit as well, which is mediating certain aspects of this. I don't remember the whole bit of it. But he was making an attempt to track that to the body, the polyvagus nerve, the vagal nerve. And I don't know how much advanced people moved on from that, and some people are very skeptical about polyvagal theory, and scientists generally are skeptical motherfuckers, let's face it, But the reality is that practices like bioenergetics clearly do help people because, it's like, it's a kind of an old conundrum, you might not have any proof for it, but if you're suffering and you give it a try and it makes it better, you'll probably go and do it again, regardless of the proof. So it's kind of in a quandary, and as I see science, I don't see science as seriously misguided or the people as corrupt, but there's a couple of influences which are not really very positive, and one of them is the preponderance of kind of white males and their way of thinking, and that has certainly dissipated a lot, but there's a lot more now women and different races coming into STEM, science and technology, engineering, mathematics. The second issue is not even the proving things so much, but I was going to say something there and I've forgotten what it was. I have to get my memory pills again. But yeah, the first influence is a bit the race bias. And another kind of influence in a way, it's not the thing I was going to say, is that psychologically, people who are very good at thinking often tend to not be very much in their body. They've got a little bit of there's a slight dissociative tendency there because, to be able to go into very analytic or abstract thinking is very useful for formulating theories about things, but the actual movement of the psyche to kind of get up there can be a kind of an avoidance, and so it can be very difficult for intellectual people to really grasp and deal with some of their own personal kind of core psychological issues, So the other thing I was going to say is that because we're living in very much a kind of free enterprise, for-profit society, and I think that works very, very well for a lot of things, but it really doesn't work for medicine in many ways. To me, medicine and healthcare just stand out as things which don't really work very well, where you could have a lot of people who basically just need some extra connection in their life, which would cost absolutely nothing if a bit of organisation was done, instead of which they get put on medication for long periods of time, which eventually just fucks them up even more, essentially, So, whilst I totally actually quite into the free market and can even bang on about the redemptive power of total capitalism at times, it's clear that the area of medicine needs a lot of work because it really doesn't fit well, and the problem is that with the for-profit thing, of course, the pharmaceutical companies or any other researchers, that the universities are looking for grants, in order to do research. The pharmaceutical companies are looking for treatments which they can patent and which, don't really cure something, but which kind of keep it in abeyance for a little while. it's not that these people or things are so corrupt, it's just the way, as I see it, the way the system works. And so, we haven't really as a culture managed to come out of that mindset. I feel that we're wrapping at the ceiling a little bit, if we come out of coronavirus panic, and then we're wrapping at the ceiling a little bit, and there are a growing number of people and scientists, because I get a lot of science and psychological types, hardcore PhDs coming to my workshops, very interested in this work, and the physicality of it. We are starting to wrap at the ceiling a little bit and say science needs to change, and really that there has to be an incentive to scientists to study stuff which is just really useful for humans, as opposed to making money for corporations or, maintaining kind of rather archaic philosophies and things like this. So, it's a rather long answer of your question, which is a great question. But for me, that would be so great to have scientists actually allocated somewhere to study body work, to study, polyvagal theory or whatever, and just try to find some tie-ups, and even if it's got to be subjective studies and stuff, but also, with some kind of fMRI stuff going on. Anyway, interesting question. Many people find it very hard to stand okay, this middle way in this regard. You mean with the semen retention, stand on this? Yeah, I mean, you have to find out what works for you. That's the bottom line. It's like, you just have to find out what works for you. And for most people, the reality is they just have to experiment. You just have to experiment. You have to experiment enough until you have this experience and you think, that was pretty fucked up. I don't think I'm going to do that again. But maybe that experience for someone else was like really great, and totally worked for them. So you just, you kind of go around the great sweet shop of life and try things, and see what works for you. It's good to have a phase of experimentalism in your life, I think, because, without, it's kind of like you miss it, I had a lot, because I was in the Osho scene and they were all super free-loving hippies, so everyone was shagging everybody, and the problem, one of the big problems that I saw was when the sannyasins, the Osho people, had kids, when the kids got to be teenagers and wanted to rebel from their parents, they would rebel into being super straight, and the dad is like, hey son, time for you to go out and shag loads of women, and it's, no dad, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to become a Christian and marry my teenage sweetheart, and there's nothing wrong with that, but very often it did not really work out. And what would have been beneficial would be to have parents who were a bit more straight. And so when you did rebel, you rebelled into going a bit crazy for a while, you got it out of your system and you kind of came back. I just see that as kind of practical. In British culture, I never went to university, but university was always seen as a place where you could just go and get off your head and shag a lot, burn it out of your system, and then kind of come back and be a good British citizen and a lawyer or doctor or something, And there is a kind of, method in the madness there. And so, essentially, with this middle way, you just have to find what works for you. But generally, you need experience to find what works for you, and you have to jump in and do stuff. Which ties into our next question. Do you meditate, and if so, how much? You see, meditation, because I was having a chat with a client today, is not just about sitting there and going om or something like this. Meditation is being as present as you can be with whatever is happening in the moment. That is really the core of meditation, whether you're from a Buddhist background or whatever, this being really present. So what I find in my bioenergetic practice is definitely to have some time when I'm just really sitting and feeling my body, whether I'm doing an exercise or whether I'm just sitting afterwards, And it is definitely beneficial for me, because when you go into a state of deep presence for even 5-10 minutes or something like that, it kind of changes your whole day or your whole morning anyway, for me, with a very lively kind of rambunctious mind. It changes you. So, I'm a big fan of meditation, but you've got to be careful with it in that you're not just focusing on the outward looking concept of meditation, some good-looking person or a rather fat Buddha sitting there with their hands like this, you know. That is the outward appearance of meditation, but meditation is just really being present with what is, completely present with it. And as this presence deepens, then, you know, you're accessing a subverbal state. And if you look at any of the kind of, you know, esoteric strands of Christianity, for example, which does have many, you know, Jesus' teachings were often on quite an esoteric level, not that I'm a Christian or something, you know, you'll find a lot of references to these kingdom of God kind of ideas. The kingdom of God is within you, whatever, and similar, no doubt, in Islam or Hinduist or these other religions that are around the place, you know. So I do meditation, but not as a kind of discipline, really, just as a kind of pleasure. But I think, you know, they used to say always 20 minutes was good. 20 minutes was good if you're looking for an amount. I think 10, 20 minutes I usually, to just be with myself. And, you know, even in bed, if you wake up in the night, if I wake up in the night, breathe and feel my body, just be really present with my body, you know. Apart from the fact that it tends to send me back to sleep quite quickly, it's like a journey, you know, when you can feel your body enough. It's kind of exciting, the feeling of a body, you know, and I focus on a certain point where there's a bit of tension. It's like, without any cognitive talking thing going on, there's like a journey, there's an opening into that part of the body. It's fascinating stuff. Just off topic, my voice is more grounded since I'm doing bio. It's as if my voice has become more deeper for sure. Do you think it's with the grunt type noises doing bio or becoming more grounded? The grunting definitely helps, in my opinion, Steve. Yes, the grunting definitely helps. It annoys the shit out of a woman that now lives downstairs from me, but, you know, so I have to be not too grunty. But it definitely helps, you know, when you start to get that belly centre a bit open, then that old deep voice can come in, you know, and you've got access to it when you want it. It's fascinating stuff, because in normal human communication, of course, we're monitoring other people's body posture, you know, how they're moving and what they're saying with their gestures. We're monitoring their eye movement towards us or other things. We're monitoring their voice and their tone and their depth, you know. So having access to a deeper voice, particularly as a guy, but I think also for women, if your voice is a bit squeaky, you know, you just get taken more seriously, because in a sense it's psychologically valid, because to get down to the belly, you have to go on a journey, a psychological journey of clearing out stuff. And that means what you say is nearer to a kind of purity, you know. So the fact that people tend to take you more seriously if you've got a deep, slow voice, you know, it tends to go in more, rather than someone who's very intellectual but quite high-voiced and trying to convince you of A, B and C. You know, when you've got that deep, slow energy that you can really hold something, you know, then people tend to listen to you. And on a sort of deeper level, that is because you can't get that voice unless you've cleared stuff out, basically. So what you say is more pure. Do you think people do extreme sports and go to amusement parks for thrill rides to get the same effects of bioenergetics? I certainly feel that, you know, I mean, there's a lot of chemicals that we can pulse through our brains which make us feel good. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And at times I thought, oh God, I've got addicted to running along the seafront, because after I finish it gives me this rush of good feelings. But nowadays I think it's absolutely fine. And I don't know all the different chemicals that come through, but I notice that gym work or running tends to give different kind of positive high than bioenergetics or say yoga, you know, a bit different in a sense. So, you know, I don't know, I know there's quite a few different feel-good chemicals now, serotonin, endorphin, dopamine, whatever, you know, and it's really good to be able to get a good head of those chemicals in your system for your morning of doing stuff, you know, because then you can be really functional and effective at what you do and have a good time with it as well, and resilient to negativity from yourself or others. So I think those things are good. When you look at successful people, they're all getting up early and moving their energy. They're just doing it. They just do it, and from that you can be very successful. But I'm drifting a little bit, aren't I? But so I don't know. To go back to your other question, it would be good to find out what kind of chemicals do pulse through people's bodies from different sports that they do, or different workouts, or different like different therapies and stuff. That would be fascinating shit. Maybe someone's already done that. I don't know. I know there's a whole different class of messenger chemicals, and the different ones probably come from different experiences. Great questions. Good questions this week. Thank you for the knowledge and advice once. Cheers. No worries, my man. No worries. I hope life is good up north. Anyway, guys, if anyone is sitting there and they've got a kind of question and they haven't dared open it, put their question out yet, you've got a couple of minutes to do it. Basically, simple as that, because we come to an hour. So just let me know if you've got a question. I think it's great to put questions out. A lot of us are so really shy, and right now you can change that if you've got a question that's exciting for you. You've got about 1 minute left. But I do enjoy doing the live streams and making the videos and supporting people, and it also keeps me engaged with bioenergetic practice. Sometimes I'm very much like, okay, I've got to do this exercise now for the journey or some video I'm making or a client or whatever, and I really get a lot out of it as well. So it's like, if I didn't have that use for it, then I probably wouldn't do it. And then, so I'm grateful. At the end of the day, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that people are still turned on to bioenergetics, and that they're willing to go for it and to try these different therapies. Have you ever worked with combat sports athletes? I get a lot of guys who've done that kind of thing, but I don't think they're really, athletes. I guess you mean people who are kind of at Olympic level or something like that. Not that I can recall off the top of my head. But, something to watch out for with combat sports a little bit, and I think they're great, and I could probably doing more myself, is sometimes you get guys who get really good at fighting, but emotionally they're still a wreck. And it can often be that, because we're all born very young and very, very vulnerable. We have no control over what's going on around us, and we only have certain survival strategies we've inherited from our genes. And when bad shit is going in, when there's some level of invasion, psychological or physical, what often happens for guys in particular, and women to a degree, is you get to the teenage years and you think no one's ever going to fucking hurt me again, and so you start to get really good at fighting, or get your muscles up real strong so everyone keeps no one's fuck with that guy, But the trouble is, of course, that it doesn't take away the psychological wound inside. Doesn't have a wound inside. It doesn't take it away, basically. So then they're still doing that. Okay, one last question. Did you meet your current girlfriend after starting your bioenergetics journey, or beforehand? Did it ever play any relationship with her? Well, she's quite into it as well, but I don't think it had a play. I met her at the community I used to live, and we're still together, though she's there and I'm on lockdown here, basically. But I don't think the bioenergetics made that much difference. I remember when I first started to do bioenergetics and other really intense therapeutic practices about 20 years ago. People on the workshops will get horny as fuck, because when you work with the body, all this energy comes up and your sexual energy is going crazy. So pretty much everyone was humping everybody else like mad, and that was kind of good fun, and at times, and also very insightful. Everything comes up around sex. Everything comes up around sex and love. So when you work with those forces in the group room, because there's so much triggering, for people who actually want to become more aware and not just sort of hide away in life, it can be really beneficial, though it is quite a grueling ride at times, as I can personally testify. Okay, guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and some really awesome questions this week. If you're still on lockdown, I hope you're doing good with it, and yeah, Namaste. I will speak to you all later.